Hey everybody, how is it going? James Ingicasso here, back to talk to you about Arcadia 12, and I'm here with one of the authors right now. I'm the managing editor of Arcadia. Carlos, tell people who you are and what you did for Arcadia.
Yeah, so my name is Carlos Cisco, he, him. I'm a television writer and narrative designer. I currently work on Star Trek Discovery, but I also do game design as sort of a side hustle and freelance thing. And this time I wrote an article called The Stuff of Nightmares, which was both inspired by wanting to do something centered on long rests and dreams and stuff, but also really drawing from horror movies and kind of like my bread and butter where my interests are, culturally speaking.
Excellent. Yes. So, Stuff of Nightmares, right? Give me the big overview. What is the Stuff of Nightmares? Aside from one of my favorite, most horrific things that we have put out in Arcadia thus far.
So it's two encounters that are centered around long rests, and that was kind of the inception for the idea. And one of them is a little bit. I mean, I don't want to say it's an adventure per se, because it's still pretty open-ended. Like, you could inject it into a campaign, I think, pretty easily without missing a beat. But it's more of I think like a beefy encounter that is very loosely based on Nightmare on Elm Street, in that you're going to be dealing with a dream-based revenant that is attacking you night after night, and trying to figure out how to get around that and solve that problem. And then the other one is based around, it kind of started based around the idea of sleep paralysis, but then also kind of morphed a little bit into like taking elements from the Babadook and really just taking in that sort of unknowable horror that comes at you when you sleep, that you can't really like perceive or see its full form. And then I also really wanted to do asymmetrical encounters. That was really like mechanically the goal that I set out to do. Was there are encounters that there are things to do both on the side of the sleepers and the people who are awake, if there are people awake. So that's kind of, I think, the basic overview.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, right? And I think this idea of an asymmetrical encounter is something that I want to talk to you about, and we'll dive deep into, because we had a lot of fun designing that. The testers had a lot of fun playing that. But let's start with the first encounter that you have, and walk me through it kind of in depth, and talk to me about the exciting beats within this encounter. Because like you said, it is an encounter, but it's an encounter that takes place over multiple nights, the same way, like you said, Nightmare on Elm Street does.
Yeah, so the idea is that you roll into a town, whether it's like a sprawling metropolis like Waterdeep, or, you know, some podunk backwoods town in the middle of, you know, bumblefuck nowhere. And it's like sort of designed to fit in either one of those, because the idea is that the innkeeper has a lot of these inns, or moves the inn quite often for reasons that will become apparent. But there's a story that goes with the inn, that there was a stormy night, and this mysterious being walked into the inn, attempted to rest in another patron's dreams, and everyone was like, "Nah, we got Dragonborn, we got orcs. That's too weird. Let's kill him." And so they killed this being, which I was inspired by Arcadia 3. Justice Armand's sand speaker ancestry. And so the being is this glass person filled with sand. And so the adventurers inside, yeah, there we go. The adventurers inside the inn ended up killing this being, and slowly, one by one, they died. Eventually, and the only survivor was the innkeeper that just sort of let it all happen. And what turns out is the innkeeper is a disguised red dragon who, for various reasons, isn't really into the whole raiding and pillaging, but more into sort of a capitalistic view of hoarding their wealth, managing properties, licensing out like art to galleries and stuff. And so, again, that comes into play sort of later in the adventure. But we have these two forces, a red dragon and essentially like a revenant. The revenant wants to kill this dragon, but the dragon's like, it's probably not going to happen. Let's make a deal. And they strike a pact that enables the glass ghost, which is what it's then called, to slake its thirst for killing adventurers by any time an adventurer stays in this inn. They will be sort of psychically connected to this ghost, and the ghost will then try to kill them over the next few nights. If it's successful, Mari will send various animated rugs to go pick up their belongings, which then make it back into the mystery box of various bloody and semi-used items that belong to adventurers that act as a prize for people who stay the night. So basically you will encounter this dream revenant night after night, and you can only kill it in the dream itself. And so in order to do that, you have to get hurt by it in an initial encounter so that you can come into a proper combat encounter. So the first night, maybe only a couple people may be in the encounter, and they can try to run, they can try to fight, it may get too hairy, they can get woken up. And so I think what I had sort of aimed for in that is once you get into the meat of the encounter, over the first couple nights, it's going to take people some time to sort of get into the fight. And so the people on the outside are going to be responsible for either staying awake and like healing damage on the people who are getting slashed by this ghost, because what happens in the dream happens in real life. And so it sort of gets all muddled together where you're fighting this thing night after night. It gets stronger. And then eventually you can destroy it. You destroy it in the dreams. And then you're like, okay, well, we're done. But a week later, it comes back and it starts all over again. And so you have to actually find the root of the curse. And actually it's part and parcel to what Jess was just talking about, or Leon's curse article right. a few issues back, that it's not as simple as remove curse, and you have to actually negotiate with Mari about how to sort of end this deal, which it's probably going to be pretty difficult to convince a red dragon to let this thing try to kill it over and over again. So you may end up having to fight a red dragon in it, but if you defeat Mari, whether by negotiation or by, physical violence, you get access to her holdings, which I intentionally used as a way to seed whole other adventures. Like you could get a keep. Keep might be haunted. You get access to like 700 platinum or something like that. And it's on another continent, like you have access to all these art pieces and stuff like that. But you can't take them out of the museums until the end of the year or renegotiate the prices, the licensing fees. There's a whole thing about like, you could decide the fate of people living in low income housing properties, or like if you help a mercenary, I use it as a way to like, instead of giving you a traditional dragon's hoard, I'm like, I'm going to make them work one more step for it. Like they have to go on an adventure to get the money, and it's because it's hidden somewhere. And I thought that was, I don't know, a fun way to end it. I'm at least when I play, to me, like a reward, like as much as I love getting a valuable magic item, I also love finding something that's like, holy shit, we got a side quest. And I think that's really fun. For players and for DMs.
Yeah, and it totally fits the encounter that you have created as well, right? It fit the personality of this villain and sort of what their whole villainous plot was, right? Like giving away some of the magic items that they get from adventurers, because that's not what they're into, right? They're into building a diverse portfolio of investments. But we know that that's true, and we know that that's a great way to build wealth. And it does make sense that, like, in a medieval fantasy world, a dragon would be ahead of the curve on that, right? And
I think like these are creatures that live thousands and thousands of years. Like, not all of them just want to sleep on a pile of money in a cave somewhere. I feel like our dragons can be a lot more textured than that. And I think, to Wizards' credit, Fizbins, I think, really opens that up for a lot of people who wouldn't have otherwise used dragons outside of the kind of Smog model, treating them as crime lords, as religious leaders and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so I think what you're saying is Jeff Bezos could be a dragon. I'm not saying he is, but I'm saying there's a possibility that Jeff Bezos could be a dragon. I
feel like he's more of like an elder brain.
Fair enough. So let's dive into your second encounter here, okay? Because this is a wonderful creature, and I'm gonna give my take on why after you talk about it a little bit. But there's a mechanical thing that is involved with this creature that one of our playtesters, who I think is actually in chat right now, Alex, pointed out to me, and I am going to point it out to you because I was like, oh yeah, this is just a great thing about it. So take me through encounter 2.
Yeah, so Encounter 2 is much less of a character-based sort of, diving into motivations and stuff like that. It's a pretty simple, cut-and-dry thing. There is a thing, the Hypnagogue, that wants to get into the material plane because it can't eat where it lives on the astral plane. So it basically anchors a piece of itself around sleeping individuals and consumes their dream energy, which is mechanically represented as levels of exhaustion. And if it sucks up enough of that energy in a short enough amount of time, it can tear into reality. And when it does, it's horrible. Like it's like a really. I feel like it's a challenge rating 7 creature, but man, like that would give a level 7 party, I think, a run for their money, coming in at full strength with a couple of them trapped. But basically this thing traps people that are sleeping around it in like a dream space where it's impossible to wake them up. You can't shake them. You can't do anything. And there is a out of place object at the center of them, pulling them in slowly every turn. Now, you can end this encounter pretty simply if you read context clues, and you can make this thing not ever come out to begin with by just removing the food source. So if you just remove the bodies from this 30-foot perimeter, it can't do anything. It can't enter the world. And so encounter done, your successful party. However, if it's able to suck up 10 exhaustion points within, I believe, a minute, it can come out. And so you have the dreamers trapped in this liminal space where they are able to do some sort of limited forms of communication with the outside world. They can try to affect their own saving throws in terms of like being connected to this thing or avoiding exhaustion, getting their energy taken away, or forcing themselves to wake up, which will have deleterious psychic effects on them when they do, because you're forcing yourself out of a nightmare. So you'll come out a little disoriented, yeah, and so that's kind of the basic idea. When it comes out, it's this horrible, amorphous, betentacled thing that makes the weird connective tendrils that it's been draining your party members with flesh. So it's basically this horrible shadow creature with fleshy tendrils attached to its back with your party members face sucked to them, flying around, and it's hitting you with them. And it is like I was trying to imagine what the worst possible thing for me to run into in real life would be, and it would be something like that. And then that's kind of the idea, is that the more party members that it has connected to itself, the harder it gets. And so it behooves you to not let it eat your friends, your NPCs, what have you. And then I also try to outline ways for this encounter to work where your party is not the target of it. where you could come into a mead hall and everyone's dead in like these really weird ways, and it becomes a mystery of like, what are we looking for? Like, what is this creature? You know, and I think you could play it in that way if you wanted to start it where it's already released and a massive threat to a city or, you know, what have you. And then, yeah, I think that's the kind of the basis of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that one of the things that is wonderful about this, and you've already touched on this a little bit, is that often in D&D, when we're fighting something, it is just as dangerous on its turn when it has full hit points opposed to half as opposed to one, right? An ancient red dragon with 1 hit point can still use that breath weapon, probably can still murder a bunch of PCs if it does all the right things on its turn. The Hypnagogue, what's cool about it is that it has these tendrils and it is grasping people, and it can build up its power by grasping different people. And you can cut those tendrils and cut people out, and then it will lose some of its power. So as you are fighting it, you can make decisions that will depower it in interesting ways, even if you're not a wizard who has a bunch of debuff spells prepared, right? And that was a lot of fun. That was the thing that Alex, our tester, that they had mentioned to me, right, was bringing that in and seeing that. So I think that sort of thing is really cool to see in design, and it's fun to see that with this creature, because this creature has a lot of unique mechanics like that. Like you said, it's got this anchor that shows up first that is more like a puzzle that you have to solve, and if you don't solve the puzzle, well, you've let a horrible nightmare creature into your realm, which I think is just super, super fun. You love horror. I think that's fair to say, right? You're like a horror fan.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, and so
I
was great. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I truly love the genre. Like from the worst abysmal horror movies to, you know, pristine elevated horror drama, you know, which is horror. Let's face it. I love it all.
Yeah. Well, you've done a wonderful job with this, because I do think that both of these, not just in terms of the story they're telling, but also in terms of the mechanics that are being presented, really those mechanics help tell that story that you wanted to tell, which was just like a beautiful thing to see. We have a question from Patreon for you. So somebody wanted to know, particularly with the glass ghost, how did you think about the logic of mechanics and so forth in dream encounters? What design tips do you have for GMs who want to design encounters to make them feel properly dreamlike?
Well, you know, it was something, I think, like you and I were kind of kicking around a couple things, and I kind of pulled back from it because I couldn't quite grasp how to make it work mechanically. Though I think it was more in the Babadook side of it, but I think it was going to kind of play out in both, where, you know, I think the cool thing about being in a dream space, and it was the way I had kind of thought of it before, you wouldn't start with your weapons or armor or spells, but then you would use, like, it would be kind of like skill challenges. In that sense of like, I'm going to create, a 30-foot sword and slash it with, you know, and it became a little cumbersome, and it put, I think, a lot of onus on the players that are already dealing with a kind of mechanically complicated encounter that in the end, I felt like pulling back from those types of like dream mechanics actually helps the encounter be a little bit more workable, really. And so I think in the DM tips for it, what I think the way that I would do it if I were DMing it is that first encounter would take place in that multicolored desert, and then every other encounter after that with the glass ghost would pull from our character's subconscious. You know, the PC's backstories directly. Was there a place in their backstory that they had a terrible encounter? You know, like, was there a place that they saw their family get killed? Is that a place where we can have this dream encounter? Because that textures it in a completely different way for that character, you know? And like, you can use it as a way to reveal things about the backstory, or reveal things about your character's subconscious that they either maybe as players were not ready to release to the other PCs, or you could use it because like that's what I love about dreams in D&D or role-playing games in general, film, is you can use it to communicate a theme or a message or something that leaves someone with a question to interpret, and so if we are having this fight in the middle of like this, there's like a war happening around us, and we can see like this pivotal moment in this PC's backstory playing out during this battle. Like, I think that's a really rich avenue to go down for it, as far as like making it more dreamlike. I hesitate to, again, say mechanically, because you're in a dream space, you can do anything really. Like, so as a GM, go nuts if you feel like know the game well enough to completely break it apart and put it back together. I'd say do it. But I think for me, I would use it as a narrative opportunity to reveal something about character.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of, yeah, I think it does. And a lot of the in these encounters in particular, right? A lot of the dream mechanics are baked in, right? The things that the Glass Ghost does are very dream related, right? Can create several copies of themselves, which I think is like that's a whole thing right there, right? Where you're like, whoa, this is terrifying. What is this person doing? And so I think having that is really cool. And also, there's just one of the best mechanics in here is that the Glass Ghost can create a bunch of copies of themselves, and then after those copies are made, can switch positions with those copies. So you never know if you're attacking the actual Glass Ghost or a much weaker, essentially, copy of the Glass Ghost, which I feel like I've seen that in dreams so many times, like dream sequences in media and stuff like that. Yeah, and it feels honestly like something Freddy would do. Like, you stab him in the dream, and then, you hear the laugh and the clinking of the claws behind you, and it's like, oh, Freddy's standing right behind you. That was just a coat. I feel like there's a lot of fun that you can have with that too. Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from our YouTube chat here. So Christian wants to know, do you have other ideas for complex and tricky dragon hordes, like a poison bank for black dragons, or a blue dragon's cadre of imprisoned artificers and electrified driven constructs? Do you have any other thoughts that you're holding on to in your brain, Carlos?
Well, it's interesting. So one of the first adventure I wrote, and I actually think that this would be a really great model for a dragon. And it honestly, that could be rejiggered instead of a celestial to take it out of, because it's a Ravnica adventure and it's very specifically Ravnican. But it's a debtor's prison. That has, and this angel has forced forced the lawmakers to make debt illegal so that they can jail people for it and then have them write letters home demanding payment. And so it's like becomes this cycle of debt. So I think a dragon that seizes on that, like a debtor's prison, where it's basically human capital and then the people who are trying to pay off those debts to get those people released, accumulating more wealth. Those people are accumulating debt. I don't know. I think man, dragon hordes, I think it's one of those things that I just think like we're so in tune to the big pile of gold that it takes a lot to break us out of that. But I really think you just think of like economic models from the United States. Like, just look at capitalism and you can see a myriad different ways for dragons to sort of hoard wealth, whether it's, avoiding taxes, like the regional taxes by, storing your money off continent, or, I guess dragons probably find other ways around taxes, like burning the king down. But, I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question. I would, to come up with some like truly cool ones, I would have to sit and think with it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the first thing comes to mind would be just regurgitating some of my old work. And I think like a debtor's prison would be really interesting, because then you also have just like, it's not just money, you're saving people. You're actually changing livelihoods of people. So I think that like so much of dragon hordes are disconnected piles of wealth that like in any real world, like if that like you can take a few thousand pounds of coins in your bags of holding, and then you leave the rest of the village, but that's going to crash the local economy too. It's so yeah, I don't know. There's a lot. I think again, I would say Fizbins is a really good thing to look at. I did draw from that when kind of taking some inspiration on Maury.
Excellent. We do have a question, which is the adventure you had mentioned, your Ravnica adventure. Well, where can people find it? What is it?
Oh, yeah, that's in, it's called House of Resplendent Obligation. And it is in the Eat the Rich anthology, which you can't find by searching my name because it's under the authors. I'm skilled to look up it's the first Eat the Rich anthology. And yeah, it's in there. It's a level, I believe it's a tier 2 adventure. And yeah.
That's excellent. We have one more question and then we'll probably wrap up. But the question is, what horror movies other than Nightmare on Elm Street and The Babadook should GMs get into to feel inspired to run these stuff of Nightmares Encounters?
Hellraiser. I think Hellraiser is just, if you want to like do any sort of like weird interdimensional supernatural horror, you should be watching Hellraiser. God, for this one in particular, not for this one in particular, but I think it's extremely underrated, and it's an excellent example of how soundscapes can create horror, and maybe as an inspiration to create a cool soundscape for your table is a little-known Canadian horror film called Pontypool. It's a zombie film, but not really. And I think the less I say, the better about it. I think actually Hereditary is it's a hard movie, but it's a really good movie in terms of learning how to capture tone without overt displays of violence or gore until they're there. Yeah, yes, and to the chat, if you can handle it. It's a hard movie.
Sure.
But it's, sure. I think it's has like weird cult vibes and just like really captures the sort of like the horror of the mundane and kind of in the same way that like the Babadook does, of just like the horror of family drama and what that can be. Yeah. Those would be some immediate favorites.
That's great. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for talking with us today. Where can people find you, and what are you working on right now?
Yeah, so I'm working on season 5 of Star Trek Discovery, so hopefully you'll be able to see something in 2023, whatever we air that. But in the meantime, you can watch my first episode of Star Trek on Paramount Plus. It's episode 407, season 4, episode 7. If you want to watch the whole series to get to my episode, great. If not, all you really need to know to jump into my episode is that there's a big gravitational anomaly that is affecting everybody, and the Federation is trying to decide what to do about it. And in the B story, the ship's computer has become sentient, and they're trying to decide what to do about it. So that's pretty much all you need to know to kind of get it. So that's on Paramount Plus in the United States, various other platforms internationally that I don't know off the top of my head. I can be found on Twitter at Carlos_Cisco. I have a few podcasts coming out in the next few months. I was on, I recorded the Coatl episode for Kill Every Monster, which was super fun, getting to dig into a creature that like has fascinated me, like mythologically speaking, most of my life, but I find really super underwhelming in the Monster Manual. And then I just did an episode of a podcast called Queer Splaining, which it's like a queer story-centered podcast, but it's really about my journey through writing from, back when I started wanting to be an actor to flitting with narrative design and then having it become a side hustle to getting on Star Trek to all of that. So I kind of outlined the whole story there. That'll be coming out in the next few months. So those will be announced on my Twitter, and that's it. I have stuff on the DMs Guild for iHunt. I have some, speaking of Star Trek, some Star Trek Adventure stuff that I can't talk more than obliquely about, coming out sometime this year, whenever it's announced. So that'll be fun. So that's where
awesome.
they can find me.
Well, it is always great to have you here, Carlos. Thank you so much for your work on Arcadia, for joining me for our chat today, and for everything you're doing for the RPG community. It's really great to have you here.